The story begins with a doctor asking our protagonist, Taesung, how he was feeling today, while the boy thinks that every day it's the same question. Depressed, the young man replies that his legs hurt, affirming in his mind that it's always the same answer every single day. The doctor says he understands and begins talking to the nurse, while our protagonist, immersed in his thoughts, mentions that he no longer tries to figure out when things started to go wrong. The nurse starts to lead him to his room, and the boy says that when he woke up, everything was already over. After waking up from the accident, the only things left for him were pitiful glances and the monthly insurance expenses, but the worst was the cruel reality of being paraplegic and in a wheelchair. The boy's expression is completely devastated. He explains that it was an accident caused by a drunk driver who was driving recklessly. It was a painfully ordinary day. Taesung had gone to the convenience store. The young man went to buy beers and some things to eat, but there was something different about that day. We see our protagonist distractedly using his phone while a truck begins to rush towards him. The thing that was especially different that day is that he was a bit unlucky, and it cost him his freedom. Realizing the situation, the young man panics, but before he could react, the items in his hand fly into the sky and he is struck. He states that it was a tragic day that simply ruined his life, and at that moment, the nurse was helping the boy lie down on the stretcher. Taesung comments that he felt an immense pain in his legs as if they were always being torn from his body. Looking at his hand with some medicine, the boy thinks that he has no choice but to rely on the medication every night to reduce his suffering. Finally, the boy mentions that people say God only gives trials you can bear, but he would have preferred to die than to go through this. After some time already at night in the hospital, the boy was sedated by the medication but still couldn't sleep. With the phone in his hand, the boy states that there weren't many things he could do being paraplegic, and the most he could manage was to read novels. The boy also thinks that he started reading a new one last week while staring at his phone with a notification that he received 50 free chapters. Taesung thinks that whenever he read novels with happy endings, he also felt happy, and it was comforting to read on days like that when sadness completely overwhelmed him. After staying up all night with a completely empty look on his face, the boy thinks that he had almost finished reading that novel and would finish it that night. Recapping the ending of the story he had read, Taesung explains that the wizard Aiden destroyed everything in his path and in the end claimed victory and chose to create a new world. He ended the old world and created a new one according to his own liking, and everyone lost their memories and lived a happy life. Even those who experienced traumatic deaths and those who Aiden cherished were there, and in the new world, everyone lived happily even without remembering that the war existed. However, with that ending, our protagonist was extremely irritated, wondering what the hell that was. He thinks that the protagonist did everything to protect the world, but Aiden ended up undoing everything and destroying the world that he tried to save just to create a new one for himself. Trembling, our protagonist, Taesung, wonders why the novel he randomly chose to read also had to have a bad ending. Placing his hands over his head, the boy begins to cry incessantly, questioning why he couldn't be happy no matter what he tried. Consoling himself, he thinks that he certainly didn't care about the novel's ending, and that even if he woke up tomorrow, he would never be able to experience something like a happy ending, so the only thing he could do was fall asleep and face his reality. However, before the IV in his vein, a blue light begins to emerge and illuminate the entire hospital. A holographic window appears informing that the mission, the wizard who dominates the world, has begun, and someone with clear eyes can be seen waking up. Taesung, who was completely different upon waking, is utterly confused about what was happening. He thinks it was as if he had seen a message in front of him and wonders what that was. Looking at his legs, the boy thinks that perhaps this is a hallucination due to the pain. However, when he looks to the side, the boy starts to notice that he was in a completely different house and not in the hospital where he used to stay. Analyzing the rustic appearance of the residence, Taesung begins to wonder where he was and what that was. The boy states that he had fallen asleep in a hospital, and trying to understand more of what was happening, Ta questions if he was dreaming while he starts to search for his phone. During the search for his smartphone, the boy notices that beside him there was a pot of water, and as he looks into it, he begins to see his reflection. Sweating nervously, Taesung realizes that his face and appearance were completely different and he looked like a new person. Our protagonist starts shaking the water bucket, wanting to know what had happened to his face since this was someone else's appearance. Something even more surprising happens, and as he realizes what he's doing, the boy notices that just now, his legs had moved. Several holographic particles start to appear in front of him, leaving the young man confused, and then a system screen appears with some messages. Staring at that technology he had never seen before, Taesung begins to question what it was. The system said that this was the world of the wizard who dominates the world, and from now on, our protagonist must live as the character Mord Vernars. Seeing this, the boy realizes that it was the title of the novel he was reading the night before. Moreover, Mord is a supporting character in it, and while the boy tries to understand the situation, the system states that if Mord dies, Taesung will die too. Our protagonist begins trying to assimilate everything that is happening and says that if this is true, looking at his legs, the boy remains incredulous, not knowing whether to believe it. Taesung keeps moving his legs, saying that before he couldn't even feel his limbs, but now he could even move them. And now the boy could even stand up, and at that moment, we see that in his new body, The young man had an extremely athletic physique. He can't stop sweating, thinking that he could even clearly feel the ground beneath his feet and all the sensations around him. The system reappears, materializing in front of Taesung, informing him that it is loading some information. Our protagonist is startled, and various pieces of information begin to enter his mind, along with the memories of the character Mord and all the events of the novel. He can feel all the memories of that body entering his head, and putting his hands over his hair, the boy begins to feel desperate about it all. Taesung says he could even see the kind of life Mord led and how it ended in the novel. Mord Verners, a son of the peculiar Vernars family and a warrior who in the future will become extremely powerful. He is an illegitimate son of the patriarch of the family, someone so powerful that even if the protagonist Aiden and his group fought together against Mord, it wouldn't be guaranteed that they would win. However, in the midst of a ritual to gain full control over his mind, Mord was ambushed by the protagonist and his group. And in short, he is a supporting character who only plays a supporting role. And after all this, Taesung questions why he became Mord. The screen appears again in front of him and finally informs him that Taesung must change the world's destructive fate. And with that, our protagonist's wish will be granted. Reading that and seeing the word wish, he becomes extremely interested, knowing that he could do many things with it. Our protagonist is hesitant, wondering if his deepest desire will really be fulfilled or if it's just a deception. With the system talking about destructive fate, he assumes that the hologram was probably referring to the novel's ending. So that system wants Taesung to protect the world instead of Aiden, who will destroy that land later, and with all that, the protagonist mentions that he needs to think a bit. The young man also says that he might be dreaming because he was tired of his previous life. Tae remembers moments from his last life where he hated repeating every day as a paraplegic. So if this were a dream, he didn't want to wake up and didn't care if it was a prank or something like that. And already thinking about his wish, the boy states that he wanted his body to return to how it was before the accident. In fact, he wouldn't be satisfied with just that. Once again, the young man remembers the request the system made while he begins to ponder something. The boy thinks that he had all the information about the novel, The Wizard Who Dominates the World. In addition to all of Mord's power and talent, changing the destructive fate was extremely worth trying as long as his wish would be granted. And finally, our protagonist declares that he wouldn't just try, no matter what, he would succeed. The explanation about Mord Verners continues as he is a part of the bloodline of Artuk Verners and is a bastard son. Without knowing who his mother was, the boy had a difficult life because a few days after his birth, his mother passed away. The young man began to be called the cursed one who killed his own mother and lived his life as a weakling, unable to withstand the pressure and insults from others. We then see Mord in the past with his head down being insulted by several nobles. It wasn't because he was weak or didn't know how to fight back, it was simply because the guilt of being the cursed one who killed his own mother consumed him from the inside out. But there were many things that would become turning points in the poor boy's life. Those who are of the Verners bloodline awaken their powers when they turn 15 years old. They call this awakening the awakening of divine blood, and those who go through this awakening must endure pain comparable to setting their body on fire. But after all this suffering, the person will be blessed with tremendous powers. However, for someone who was not entirely part of the Archuk's family, the chances of surviving the blood awakening were less than 1 in 5. Mord was different. The boy survived the awakening of new blood and gained great powers that made him extremely powerful. Taesung remembers the letter he received that said if he survived his 15th birthday, he should go to the Vernars family's main house. Our protagonist explains that Mord read the last letter his mother had left for him and went to where the Archuk's family lived. He agreed to undergo a test to be recognized by his father, whom he had never seen before. All of this explanation is Taesung's memories now in Mord's body. The boy thinks that according to all this, he must have arrived the day before at the Vernars' house to take the test. The boy considers that Mord is a supporting character in the novel, but Artuk Vernars is the antagonist of the story, and so the young man says he knows a lot about that family. This family already has several direct descendants, so it would be difficult for Mord, a bastard son, to be accepted by them as they would despise him. But growing up without parents made the supporting character full of a desire to be recognized as a son of the Archuk. However, his father only wanted to use him. Having managed to survive the awakening of new blood made the boy so strong that even the protagonist would struggle in a fight against him. Since the supporting character didn't show all his power in the novel, Taesung sees this test as an opportunity to see the true potential of his new body. However, diverting his attention, a bearded man enters the room, calling our protagonist and asking if the boy had forgotten what day it was. Taesung thinks that this guy, according to Mord's memories, is an instructor named Todd, and he is the one who will personally oversee his test. Todd is a muscular man with short hair and a beard, and has various battle scars. In an imposing manner, the man asks what the boy was doing standing still. In his mind, the boy notes that this guy was quite ripped, as an instructor should be, and then he goes up to the man, asking if he was Todd. For some reason, the man finds the whole situation strange, thinking to himself that the boy seemed a bit different from yesterday, as if his personality had changed. And staring at our protagonist, Todd notes that even the boy's gaze was different from the day before, but he thinks that it was just his imagination. Todd asks Mord if the young man had forgotten the explanation about the test he was going to take, and Werner's retorts, asking what kind of test he was supposed to do, as he didn't remember. The soldier explains that it would be a test to see the boy's full potential, and analyzing the young man's body, he assumes that since he is strong, he must know how to fight. Sweating at the situation, Taesung realizes that he has barely gotten used to his new body and already has to fight, thinking that he would have to fight for his life, but for some reason, the protagonist is extremely excited about it, seeing it as an opportunity. Nervous about what was about to happen, Taesung states that he wanted to test his powers, and this would be his first chance to do so. After a short period, we see the boy walking behind Todd through a forest. The instructor asks if the protagonist had also forgotten what he explained yesterday. But Mord is confused, and Todd explains that he had already mentioned that the boy should not claim to be Archduke's son. Our protagonist then confirms that he understands. Mord thinks that Todd was talking about the unwritten rules for bastards, but it didn't make sense to follow them since rumors were already spreading everywhere. And there are rumors that even the Archduke had already met Mord before, and soon everyone will discover who the bastard is that will become an official warrior. Several muscular students are also standing nearby, and Todd begins to approach them, saying that he had already arrived and noticed that everyone was already there. Werner stays silent, observing the situation, and one of the other students questions if that's the newcomer who will be tested that day. Meanwhile, Mord thinks that the other students seem too young to be ordinary trainees and are probably unofficial warriors. Todd says that he was already assuming that our protagonist knew how to fight, commenting that the way Werner's fights is different from common warriors. The young man begins to explain with a serious expression that Werner's uses weapons when they are not properly trained and prepared. But once they are trained, it will no longer depend on common weapons, as they will obtain something extraordinary. And with that family style, they will fight using only their own bodies and hands with their powers. Todd confirms this, noting that of course, those who are not of Werner's blood use weapons, but others learn combat skills. Mord thinks that he already knew about this because the Werner's family is the best warrior organization on the continent, and they achieved this solely through hand-to-hand combat. Our protagonist begins to think that it seemed almost impossible, but there is no weapon in this world that surpasses the physique of the Werners, regardless of the blacksmith who forges it. Tada begins to explain that this test will determine which affiliation the warriors should follow and how they should train, and he asks one of the students, named Vince, if he is ready. Vince nods, then says he is fully prepared as he begins to walk to the center of the training area. Todd orders Mord to fight against Vince, stating that the result of this fight will determine the boy's future, so he should give his all and prove that he possesses Werner blood. The two boys stare at each other for a moment, staying silent as they observe one another, and Vince begins to analyze his opponent. Vince questions Mord if the young man is sure he is 15 years old, as his face does indeed look like that of a 15-year-old. However, something seemed off considering how large the boy is. Vince wonders who the boy's father could be, mocking him afterward and calling him to fight. Taesung thinks to himself that he knew there were other bastards there besides Mord, and it seems that his father wasn't the only Archduke who strayed, asserting that he needed to focus on the fight, because only with power and brute strength could he achieve freedom, and power is very important in that world. And although it's appealing to think about living a calm and simple life far from there, he believes he had no choice in the matter, as he knows what will happen in the future of that world. Bernars gets into a fighting stance, commenting that he would have to prove his abilities right there in front of everyone. Quickly surprising the blonde boy, our protagonist charges at him, ready to throw a punch. With a surprise hook, Vince manages to dodge just in time, feeling a bit shocked and surprised by that sudden move. The boy starts sweating, thinking that he didn't know Mord knew how to fight, but apparently the boy had some idea of how to. Taesung begins to spin, affirming in his mind that he was more agile than expected, and he thought that the boxing he learned when he was younger was paying off. He learned this fighting style just to pass the time, but it was better than nothing. So with his spin, the boy takes the opportunity to land a kick against his opponent Vince. The blonde manages to defend with his guard, however, he is thrown far away and barely manages to stop himself. Irritated, the boy admits that Mord was extremely good at fighting, and stands up again. The young man tells our protagonist that he was lying when he said he didn't know how to fight and was probably trying to take advantage of that. However, Taesung seems not to understand and says there's no reason to lie. Still, Vince insists that Mord was lying, judging by his stance. Mord, surprising everyone, replies that he just needed to copy what others do, and hearing this, the blonde boy becomes extremely irritated for some reason. Silently, he charges at his opponent with some greenish energy in his hand, leaving our protagonist startled. One of the other bastard sons questions why Vince is using mana, asking him to stop, but the instructor interrupts, ordering the two to continue fighting. Even so, the student remains extremely concerned about the situation, fearing for our protagonist's life, but the instructor insists once more, telling them to let the two fight. Mord is impressed that his opponent is using mana against him. However, despite this, the young man takes a fighting stance without hesitation. Vince, extremely irritated, questions how that bastard dared to insult him. The young man says that from that moment on, he wouldn't hold back anymore, so our protagonist should be happy with the lesson he was about to learn. However, even with Vince's mana-infused punch, Mort easily sidesteps and dodges the attack. Vince is extremely shocked and worried, questioning how that boy managed to dodge the attack and how a novice like him had such skill. Our protagonist was about to say something, but Vince continues questioning how that bastard could so easily predict mana combat techniques, and Mort turns, looking at Vince. The boy finishes his sentence asking if now it was his turn while starting to conjure various mana particles around his hand. Then he suddenly disappears. Vince thinks it's impossible, raising his guard and noting that he spent years training his mana combat techniques, yet he was struggling against a novice. At that moment, Werners lands a solid punch to his opponent's stomach, causing Vince to groan in pain from the blow. Vince faints and is thrown far away with extreme ease. All the other bastards and even the instructor are shocked by the scene, unable to believe what they were seeing. Todd thinks that he had imagined that this kid was just a novice, but he sent a warrior like Vince flying. Staring at Mord's back, the instructor states that the boy was extremely incredible and impressive. After practically defeating his opponent without giving him a chance to retaliate, our protagonist begins walking toward the boy who was lying on the ground. Mord stops in front of Vince and stares at him without saying a word for some time. The boy thinks that it would have been much worse if he hadn't dodged Vince's last attack, also stating that he now understood how to use that power. However, the blonde, who is sitting on the ground, starts making some movements with his hand clenching his fists. Mort takes a combat stance, questioning the blonde if he could still stand after taking a blow like that, highlighting that warriors are different. Tessa notices that even though Vince is nearly unconscious, his opponent is about to do something, and the boy is surprised by Vince's determination. One of the students questions his instructor about how Vince was defeated by a novice with just one blow, and everyone wonders where that boy came from. Mort turns to his instructor and says that he didn't know how to control his strength, so he was afraid of killing his opponent if he continued the fight. Todd gets lost in thought, stating that Mord was just a student while he was an instructor. The man thinks that the purpose of an instructor is to measure the potential and power of those being tested, pushing them to their limit, and a test taker should not be able to defeat an instructor. However, he didn't know what would happen if that fight between the two took place. So to avoid further confusion, Todd orders the fight to end, and then one of the other students walks over to Vince, helping him up. Irritated, the instructor approaches our protagonist, questioning why the boy had lied. However, hearing this, Mort is confused. Todd says that the boy claimed he had never learned to fight, but from what he had just seen, that proved otherwise. Mort explains that he truly never learned to fight in his life and hadn't lied at any point. But the instructor asserts that he won't believe it since it's impossible for someone who has never learned mana combat techniques to suddenly use them in a fight. Vernars, in an attempt to cover for himself, says that he didn't know that was mana, as he could only use it after becoming completely enraged, and he didn't even know what it was. Todd doesn't believe that explanation and asks the boy if he thought he could really convince an instructor with decades of experience with just an excuse. Still trying to keep his true nature hidden, the boy begins to talk to Todd about his blood awakening experience and what happened. It's explained to us that Mord could use mana before his awakening, which is why he is so talented. The god of combat Vernars and the goddess of the heavens Arita. The blood of these two gods runs through Mord's veins. This created an incredible synergy, making the boy a miraculous being. In other words, Mord had a blessed genetic heritage. The boy hadn't received even a minimally decent training until he was 15 years old. Yet, in just 7 years, he would become stronger than Archuk Vernars and the strongest successor to the god of combat, and that's how the story evolved. After coming up with an appropriate excuse that was also a half-truth, Todd began to believe it, saying that if it were true, the boy was a monster of talent. The instructor then asked the boy if he had any idea who Vince was, and the boy explained that since he met the blonde for the first time, he didn't know who he was. Vince was a Vernars warrior who had been trained from an early age and had gone through an extremely complicated test. And even with all that, a novice like Mord had defeated him just like that. Putting that aside, Todd explained that our protagonist earned 200 points and passed a test that has a maximum score of 100 points, questioning what he would do now. But the boy was confused because he didn't know what to do since the instructor hadn't explained anything. Mord then stated that he still didn't know what this test was for, and his instructor began to explain that the test was to define the level he was at. The Archuk Vernars family has 3 basic levels for warriors. If you meet the requirements of each level, you move on to the next, and if you pass the test of the final level, you could be classified as an official warrior. The catch was that these tests were extremely difficult, and many saw it as an impossible mountain to climb, and Mord understood what he was saying. The boy asked his instructor Todd if he could place him at the first level, and the man was extremely confused. Mord said he needed to learn about mana combat techniques from the basics and wondered if they taught that at the second level as well. Todd replied that they didn't, and our protagonist asked if he could move up a level whenever he met the requirements for each one, and Todd confirmed, still puzzled by that decision. Despite all the options available to him, Taesung still preferred to start at the first level, saying this with confidence. Todd just stared at the boy, thinking that he was really serious, and since he was just a bastard, he thought this was the best option for him. The man turned around, agreeing, and said that it's not like he could give special treatment to the boy just because he had defeated a warrior. Then before leaving, the instructor said that the classes for the day were over and that he would send someone to explain the first level to our protagonist the next day. Already lying in one of the rooms in that place, the boy began to think that the test had been extremely easy. Taesung wondered if Mord went through this whole process that he was now experiencing, since the novel didn't go into much detail about how Mord became Archduke Vernar's trump card. But that made sense as the boy was just a supporting character in the story, and there was no reason to delve deeper into his background. The boy only remembered that the Archduke of Vernars tried to maximize Mord's potential and dominate his mind to use him as a human weapon. The boy recalled that Mord was always beaten as a child and never fought back, assuming that in his past life, the supporting character must have been beaten and stayed at the first level. With all these memories and thoughts flooding his mind, the boy stated that he understood why he had possessed Mord's body. In his past life as Taesung, he wasn't someone significant to the world, but he always fought when he felt wronged. In contrast, in the novel, Mord lived a completely different lifestyle, being the complete opposite of him. The boy got up and began to walk towards something in the room while thinking that he was going to save the world from destruction, and to do so, he had to stop the protagonist of the novel. The one who gathers the world fragments, which are like puzzle pieces containing the essence of this world, can be called the supreme god or the wizard who dominated the world. Just like in the title, the great wizard Aiden manages to gather the fragments and become a being who dominated the entire world. However, at some point, this corrupted him, and with it, he brought destruction to the world. Aiden not only killed his enemies, but also killed his own allies, and the novel depicts the struggle between Aiden and his enemies to become the world's destroyer. The next day, watching the sunrise, the boy thought that he would stop Aiden, no matter what it took. Because this might be the last chance for him, Taesung, and now he will live as Mord instead of his former self. The Vernars family governs the Archduchy of Vernars and is renowned worldwide in that world. The castle of Vernars, the heart of the nation, is as luxurious as other royal castles. But what sets it apart is the warrior training center, located outside the castle in the third region, which is extremely massive. In a carriage speeding toward a certain location, someone informs the protagonist that from that day forward, he will stay in the first level dormitory. Mort thinks that the training center seems much larger than the campus of most universities in his world. However, that was the least to be expected. A loud noise of warriors dueling can be heard nearby, and immediately, our boy becomes alert. A person beside him explains that this is probably the third level training center, and Mort asks if that noise indeed came from a group of trainees. After receiving a yes, the boy thinks that even though these people came from second level trainees, they clearly managed to surpass human limits. Moreover, Vernar's warriors are known for their ability to merge various powers into one. The same man who had previously explained things to Mord says that they will soon arrive at the third region and that the boy's instructor is waiting for him. After stepping down from the carriage, he thanks the person who brought him, and looking to the side, the boy notices that another large man is the first level instructor. A large and muscular man with black hair introduces himself as the first level instructor, Hayes, and he asks the novice to call him Instructor Hayes. Mord does as instructed, calling him as requested, and immediately after, the instructor questions if the boy's name is Mord and assumes he must have done very poorly on the test to be there. Surprising the instructor and leaving him shocked, the bastard replies that he defeated Vince in the first test, and Hayes questions if he had really beaten a warrior. After receiving confirmation, the man is incredulous, not believing what happened and wondering why the young man is there. Mord thinks there's no reason to lie about it since everyone will soon know, and explains that he never learned combat techniques, which is why he came here to learn the basics. Still shocked by everything he heard, the instructor confirms, asking the boy to follow him, while thinking that the novice defeated a warrior without any basic training. The two begin to walk toward the battle center, and Hayes explains that there are some people training, so our protagonist shouldn't distract them. The boy thinks that this might be the first level, but the instructor must be strong since he's training people who will become Vernar's warriors. Upon arriving, they see various muscular children, and the instructor introduces the new trainee, Mord. The man says that Mord is a novice, and at that moment, our protagonist is sweating, not believing that this level is meant for children. Mord starts to assume that he should have gone straight to the third level, and if he had the option to change, he would have done so. Hayes questions if the boy had never learned mana combat techniques, and Verners explains that he hadn't, but for some reason, he could use mana. The instructor states that just by having gone through the awakening of divine blood, he's already blessed, and since he has no mana, what he's going to teach now will be very easy. Hayes begins to explain some steps that the boy probably already knows, so the final step is learning to control the basics of mana and sense amplification. Our protagonist asks if he doesn't need to learn anything about the basics of combat skills. The instructor then questions if the boy wants to stay there for a long time because if he does, he will make that happen, but he supposes that the boy wouldn't want that. Werner becomes extremely nervous and says to forget about it, and the instructor remarks that he understands what happened. The man states that he will try to teach the boy a few things, and after that, he'll have to learn everything on his own because at the second level, the instructor will only help with the things he's terrible at. Mord thinks that he needs to learn everything from the basics, and he cannot underestimate himself just because it's the first level. He needs to start from the beginning to master his power. The children are shocked, questioning if it even makes sense since the novice has only been training for 10 minutes. One of the children comments that they think the novice's mana is stronger than that of the instructors, and it's possible to see the boy surrounded by a blue aura. Imposingly, he asks if that's all or if there's more he needs to learn, and Mord continues to emit a crushing aura. Immediately, and somewhat frightened by all of this, the instructor responds that he has already surpassed the first level, and the boy wonders if that's really it. Now at the second level, the boy begins to think that the physical reinforcement lessons at the second level are divided into two sublevels. The first is to strengthen your body, which helps prevent injury even if you get run over. And the second level is to amplify your abilities, allowing you to transcend the limits you reach when you train your muscles, as he demonstrates by striking a wall. The only thing visible after the blow is the hole the boy left, while he also remarks that physical reinforcement is a very difficult skill to learn. Turning and looking at his new second-level instructor, he says that all that's left is the practical test, but the new instructor thinks that the boy has already passed the second level. The man asserts that the boy doesn't need to do anything further and that just with what he's done, he will start the third level the next day. The instructor explains that the second level is easy, but the third will be much harder because as people who are part of the Werner's bloodline. With a serious expression, he states that the boy will face other powerful students without having learned any combat skills, relying only on his instincts. The young man realizes that he hasn't learned anything yet, and Hayes only sent him to the second level thinking he was hiding his power. Then the instructor puts his hand on Mord's shoulder, affirming that up to the second level, brute force is enough, but becoming a warrior at the third level won't be easy. Mord thinks that he already knew the third level would be difficult and in fact was excited to meet the people with the power of the divine blood awakening. The next day at dawn, we can see the quarters where the third level warriors stay. Some people are talking about the rumors related to Mord as he managed to pass through 2 levels in just 2 days and has Werner's blood. Fayan, a red-haired young man who is also part of the bloodline, remarks that people like our protagonist only want to attract the Archduke's attention. With a serious expression of someone asking for trouble, he declares that he will show this rat that there are rankings within the Werner's bloodline. People inform the red-haired boy that the novice has arrived, and shortly after, Mord reaches the place thinking he should have come here from the start. Fayan, eager to make his point, approaches the brown-haired boy, questioning if he's the novice, and Mord responds by asking who he is. The boy introduces himself as the captain of the second class. Fayan, our protagonist, thinks that this boy is also part of the Werner's bloodline, just like him. Mord also says that he is part of that bloodline and is in the third level, then introduces himself. With arrogance, Werner says that he doesn't know how long he will stay there. Hearing this as an insult, Fayan gets irritated, letting his aura leak out, questioning if our protagonist thinks this is a joke. Dismissively, Mord tells him not to take it that way since he wouldn't have come here if he thought it was all a joke, which only enrages Fayan further. Werner states that he's not in the mood for a fight right now, so he asks Fayan to calm down, but the boy retorts that it's expected of someone from that bloodline. Because Mord was enduring his aura, and Mord says he won't be intimidated just by feeling the aura of a weakling, which further ignites his opponent's fury. The boy begins to conjure a reddish aura in his hand while questioning Mord if he thinks the world will bow to him just because he went through the awakening. With his aura leaking and his eyes completely red, Fayan is blinded by rage, only thinking about defeating and finishing off that novice. Other students begin to laugh at the novice, saying that no one could stop Fayan and that it would be difficult for the boy to stay alive if no instructor stepped in to stop the fight. Fayan declares to Mord that he won't hold back since our protagonist is also of the Werner's bloodline. Then quickly, the red-haired boy rushes to attack the novice, trying to grab the young man's head with his hands and end the fight immediately. Blinded by rage, he says he'll make Mord pay for defaming that place and teach him a lesson about how the real world works. However, before he realizes it, a massive crash is heard, and a huge cloud of dust rises into the air, obscuring everyone's vision. The friend who was with Fayan earlier comments that the power was monstrous, and that the novice was very unlucky to run into Fayan, the leader there, but he hoped Mord would survive. As the smoke begins to clear, it becomes visible that one person is standing while another is kneeling as if they had taken a powerful attack and fallen to the ground. For some reason, all the other students are stunned by the scene, watching someone tremble after being struck by a powerful blow. The one standing is Mord, not understanding what is happening since he thought Fayan was stronger and would at least withstand one of his attacks. However, looking at Fian lying on the ground with blood dripping from his nose and mouth, he remarks that Fian was nothing more than a bully who barked a lot but had no dignity. Defeated and with his ego shattered, Fian wipes the blood from his mouth. The young man stands up, still trembling from the blow, and curses our protagonist, claiming that he only got lucky. However, the boy imposingly states that it wasn't luck, it was because his opponent was too weak. Once again, Fian lets all of his aura and mana flow out and charges at his opponent to end the battle for good and prove his strength. Taking advantage of the opening, Fian left by being enraged and blinded by anger, Mord easily sidesteps the blow with extreme ease. He uses this opportunity to spin his entire body and quickly position himself behind Fian, ready to land a kick just as he did with his first opponent, Vince. Then, coating his foot with mana, the boy kicks Fian, sending him flying again several meters away, causing the poor boy to crash into the ground multiple times. After rolling from the impact, Fian stops when he hits a wall, and at that moment, a curtain of dust rises with the impact. Watching his opponent lying unconscious, Mord thinks he overdid it and hadn't expected Fian to be so weak since the boy was the leader of the 3rd level Vernar's warriors. Looking at his own hands, the young man judges that his strike was so strong because of the basic mana combat techniques he learned at the 1st and 2nd levels. Worried, Fian's friend rushes to him, waking the boy to check if he's okay and trying to help him up. However, the warrior doesn't give up, and angry with all the humiliation, he pushes his own friend away, declaring that the battle isn't over yet. Mord, with extreme disdain and pity for his opponent, remarks that the boy had fainted and was unconscious for about 10 seconds. Despite everything, Fian doesn't let go of his pride and insists that it's a lie because Mord only struck him when he was off guard, which is why he was hit. Mocking his opponent, our protagonist says that leaving his guard down while fighting someone who will become a warrior is pathetic. Unleashing all of his rage and inner power, Fian declares that just because his opponent could talk didn't mean he could say everything that came to his mind. Thus, a red aura begins to envelop the young man, and the students, feeling that immense power, panic, realizing that Fian had awakened his powers. They shout at the novice to flee, otherwise he will die, but Mord remains unshaken and stands firm, thinking that Fian must have invoked the divine blood awakening. But he was controlling the divine blood in a completely wrong way, which makes sense since the boy was also a bastard child and didn't possess pure blood. Amidst all the chaos, someone begins to walk toward the 2 young men, questioning what the commotion was and trying to understand the situation. That person was an elder, and one of the students called him the 3rd level instructor, explaining that a fight between Fian and the novice had started. Observing the situation, the elder remained silent, and when his student asked if they should stop the 2, the old man replied that they should do nothing and just wait for now. The elder thought that Fian was strong enough to compare to a regular warrior and hadn't had many opportunities to test the boy's true power, but now there was an opportunity. Looking at Mord, he assumed that this boy must be the Vernar's child who had reached the 3rd level that day, so it wouldn't be too problematic if a child died. Red electricity began to course through Fian's body, and with a malevolent and extremely irritated smile, he declared that Mord would pay with his life. Mord, realizing what kind of power was in his opponent's hands, couldn't believe that his enemy could use such a technique. Fian clasped his hands together and quickly leaped towards Mord, attempting to strike from below with several powerful bolts of lightning emanating from his body. Seeing the attack coming his way, Verners thought that this was an advanced technique that uses the body or a weapon as a vessel to create a powerful magical form. The name of this power was Body Impulse, and finally, Fian landed on the ground, almost hitting Mord, who barely managed to dodge the attack, avoiding being struck. The powerful blow hit the ground, causing the entire area to emit a massive rumble and begin to crack. Seeing the sheer force behind his opponent's strike, Taesung thought it would be bad if he were hit squarely by that attack. But using his new power, Fian quickly approached our protagonist, telling him not to dare run away. And once again, he conjured several bolts of lightning in his hand, charging at the boy to end his life for all the disrespect he had shown. Before Fian could even react, he was quickly struck by a blow to his face, leaving him surprised. With blood once again flowing from his nose, Fian was incredulous at having been hit so suddenly, but he remained determined. A flurry of attacks followed, aimed at Mord, but the young man managed to dodge and counter every one of them. Even with his new power that allowed him to endure more hits, Mord was able to evade all of Fian's strikes without even using his divine blood. The students noticed that the novice wasn't taking any hits, but also commented that Mord's attacks didn't seem to affect Fian, as he appeared to be holding up well. However, the elder instructor pointed out that something was off, as the red-haired boy was indeed suffering and gradually wearing himself out in the fight. The red-haired boy became extremely exhausted, and the old man noted that Fian's impulse was weakening. Mord remarked that it was time to get a bit more serious, and changing his strategy, it was now Verners who charged and his enemy to land a blow. With a quick punch, the boy struck Fian's stomach, catching him off guard and preventing him from reacting to the extremely fast attack. When he was hit, Fian groaned in pain, with more tomato juice spilling from his mouth. The boy was once again thrown far away, and Mord remained in his fighting stance, apologizing because he tried to hold back, but seemed to have used too much force. Recovering from the punch, Fian angrily told Mord to shut up, claiming that all he had done so far was run away like a coward, trying to set a trap for him. However, Taesum became extremely irritated by this, merely listening to Fian's threats and using them as fuel. Imposingly, he declared that he would stop dodging and that he had been going easy, but since Fian was getting on his nerves, he would end this. Fian thought he had successfully manipulated our protagonist, assuming the boy had fallen into his trap. He then charged once again at his enemy, telling Mord not to regret it after being defeated. For some reason, the boy simply stared at the powerful punch coming his way, doing nothing to dodge, just as he had said. With the impact of the blow, numerous mana particles were scattered throughout the area, creating a brilliant light. When the students could see again, they realized that Mord was holding Fian's arm. The boy explained to his opponent that impulse doesn't work when your enemy is stronger, so Fian's attacks were nothing because Mord was stronger. Also invoking a power in his hand, but now with a bluish aura, Mord concluded by saying that this was a great lesson. Fian, filled with desperation, realizes that a user of impulse is supposed to always win against someone who doesn't have that power. It's common sense. But this guy Mord had changed everything. The last thing the red-haired boy sees is a punch coming straight at his stomach, and Fian thinks he never had a chance of winning. Once again, he's thrown back, groaning in pain, and soon after, the boy rolls across the ground, already defeated. Finally, he crashes into a wall, raising his hand as if to say something, but before he can utter a word, he collapses unconscious, unable to withstand the impact of the blows. The instructor, shocked, wonders where a monster like Mord came from, as a bastard child had defeated Fian without even using impulse. Watching the scene, he mutters that he has trained many Verners, but he has never seen a bastard child so talented. Mord had managed to close the gap between himself and someone of direct lineage. Mord turns, asking if anyone else wants to fight him, and finally the instructor comments that the boy is only 15 years old and already this strong, which means he's a monster. Daisley begins to leave the area, instructing his students to hurry and take Fian to the medical center, and one of them acknowledges the order. He thinks that if he doesn't do something about this, the chain of command here will crumble. And no matter how talented Mord is, it doesn't change the fact that he's just a bastard child. Imagining Mord as a small puppet, the old man concludes that he needs to find a way to control that boy at all costs. Our protagonist begins to explain that Fian was seriously injured in the fight yesterday and that he has to stay in the medical center now. Because of the blows he received, the boy fell into a coma and hasn't woken up until this very moment. As a result, Mord was placed in solitary confinement for 4 days, during which he spent time reading some combat tactics in a book. Closing the book he was reading, the boy remarks that this theoretical combat test was quite easy. Considering that he did postgraduate studies in his past life, the theoretical test shouldn't be a problem for him, and he would be able to handle it. The boy begins to stretch, stating that staying in the dormitory all day was boring, so he would go practice his mana combat technique. A mysterious figure arrives, telling Mord that he heard he had already caused trouble in the 3rd level training area. When our protagonist looks up, he notices that the person is Todd, and he asks his instructor what he's doing there. The man explains that the Archduke wants to see him. Our protagonist is confused, questioning why such an important figure would want to see him, and the man explains that he'll find out when he gets to the designated location. Todd also mentions that the boy doesn't need to change his clothes since the Archduke doesn't expect him to know noble etiquette, so he's fine as he is. Our protagonist simply agrees, thinking that Archduke Werners didn't care much for noble etiquette even in the novel, and with that, they set off. Todd explains that rumors about the boy have spread everywhere, about how he completed the 1st and 2nd levels, and he didn't expect things to go so smoothly. He also mentions that he thought the boy was very smart, and that he's sure others think the same. Mord doesn't understand what his instructor means and asks what he's talking about, to which the man replies that it was all a plan to attract the Archduke's attention. However, surprising him, Mord denies it, saying that he wouldn't risk his morals just to gain the Archduke's attention, since if he wanted attention, he could just become a powerful warrior. Todd thinks the boy isn't wrong and that this is better than the things he has done so far. He then explains to his student that the Archduke received a report about what happened and became interested. Taesung remarks that defeating a Vernars would indeed attract the Duke's attention, so he wasn't surprised by this. As they approach the Archduke's training area, Todd advises the boy not to do anything wrong. After stepping down from the carriage, the two observe a battle taking place nearby. Our protagonist's father is surrounded by a pink mana shield while several warriors attempt to attack him. He looks at the man with long hair and a beard, identifying him as Archduke Werners, and notes that the aura is powerful and the man even resembles a muscular giant. The warriors surrounding Werners quickly move in to break the barrier that protects him. Everyone strikes the shield immediately. However, despite the cracks forming, no one manages to break it. Seeing that his guest has finally arrived, the Archduke says that it's enough and begins to do something. A spiraling sphere starts to form in his hand, absorbing the surrounding mana particles, turning a deep red. Suddenly, what was a small marble-sized orb transforms into a large soccer ball in Wernher's hand. The enormous sphere rapidly evolves into a powerful and gigantic magic orb that begins to draw everything around it toward itself. For some reason, upon seeing this, Mord seems to recognize the ability, and then Werners prepares to conclude his attack. The boy explains that this is a powerful ability that absorbs both physical and magical attacks and converts them into a shockwave that throws enemies away. The massive magic sphere that was once gigantic concentrates in the palm of Werners' hand, and the man launches it at his opponents like a burst of energy. The blast creates a massive crater in the wall, and a curtain of smoke rises as all the other adversaries are flung back. Seeing this, the boy thinks that the God of Combat's Reflector is the name of this ability, and he believes it's still being developed by his father Werners. After launching the attack, the man considers that it's still not enough, and our protagonist concludes that even in its incomplete state, the ability is already incredibly powerful. Turning to face the instructor and his son, the Archduke apologizes for making them wait, and the two quickly kneel, bowing before the Lord. The man walks over and Mord, saying that since he called the boy there, he doesn't need to follow etiquette and can stand. In front of his son, the man appeared as a giant towering over him. He then says he heard that the boy did some interesting things at the training facilities. Grabbing his son's chin, he asks who the boy's mother was, and the boy explains that her name was Reina. The man states that he remembers her and notes that our protagonist seems to take after his mother more than his father, then asks if the young man has already gone through the blood awakening. Werners also mentions that he heard Mord defeated an impulse user using only body reinforcement and wanted to see just how strong his son was. Suddenly, the Archduke shouts for someone named Kessner, and a young man appears behind him, addressing him as Your Majesty. The father of our protagonist states that he wants this Kessner to fight against Mord, and the boy questions whether it's really necessary to fight a young man. Hearing this, the man says that this is his son who recently arrived, and he wants to see how strong the boy is, so his subordinate shouldn't go too hard on him. Looking at his opponent, Mord realizes that he is one of those who were training with the Archduke earlier, and Kessner asks the boy to follow him to the duel arena. He informs the young man that he could use any weapon, and that he would wait for the boy to choose. However, Taesung says he doesn't need one. Getting into a fighting stance, Mord explains that he never learned to wield a weapon, so he'll only use his fists. Kessner lets out a small chuckle, underestimating the boy and asking if he's really serious. Immediately afterward, he charges at Mord to attack him and see what the boy is capable of. He throws a strike at the boy, but the young man easily manages to dodge it. In his mind, Mord thinks that his opponent is fast, which is expected of someone close to the Archduke. Kessner comments that the boy dodged without using mana, getting excited. A barrage of blows begins to come at Mord, who tries to defend himself but quickly realizes that this opponent is on a completely different level compared to Vince and Fian. After this sequence of strikes, the boy is thrown back and barely manages to stay on his feet, still alive in the fight. Kessner begins to emit his aura, which is ablaze, saying that he likes the way our protagonist fights because even when cornered, he wasn't giving his all. Mord starts to sweat from the heat he's feeling, thinking that his opponent is using mana, and judging by the strength, he must be of the Werners' bloodline. The boy also acknowledges that now that he thinks about it, he has never fought with everything he has while observing his opponent walking towards him. The young man begins to summon his mana as well, stating that since his opponent is someone from the Archduke's entourage, it should be worth it to give his all, so he won't hold back. A powerful and brilliant blue energy begins to emanate from Mord's body. The auras of the two extremely powerful opponents clash like a battle in the jungle. The Archduke was impressed by what he saw, and Kessner couldn't believe that this was the mana of an apprentice. Taesung thought that Mord probably never maximized his potential since he grew up hearing people call him the cursed one who killed his mother. The boy likely never had the chance to use his full power due to the guilt he carried on his shoulders. Now in battle stance, the current Mord begins to think that this time would be different because he was going to do this for the Mord who never got to unleash his true power. With a serious expression in his fighting stance, Taesung starts to provoke Kessner, asking him to come at him. Kessner laughs, confirming, and quickly, with all the speed and explosiveness, charges at Mord, saying he's going to teach him a lesson. Mord manages to defend himself with his arms, preventing his opponent's attack from reaching his face. Kessner admires his opponent, saying he understands why the Archduke is interested in the boy because the rumors were not false. But all of that was useless, so with one fist still pressing against our protagonist's guard, the man unleashes an unknown attack. Once again, Mord is thrown back, thinking that he was sure he blocked it, and assumes that it must be a technique that doubles the attack's impact. Kessner doesn't give him a chance to breathe, affirming that the boy still has a lot to learn, and quickly charges at him again to end the fight. Before Mord could think about how vast the power gap between them was, he was struck by a powerful blow to his stomach. The boy is slammed into the wall, feeling the impact of the punch and spitting out some saliva. Kessner gives a small smile, stating that he hasn't even started yet, so the boy better not disappoint him. As the dust clears, the Archduke's subordinate knight starts to mockingly ask if that was all our protagonist had. Still hurt from the attack, the young man tries to stand up, acknowledging that there's a huge difference between them, even without the man using impulse. As he struggles to his feet, Mord wonders if he should use the power of divine blood, but he dismisses the idea, realizing that if he did, his opponent would likely do the same. Kestner starts to get irritated, saying that the boy seemed to be overthinking things. Mord remains silent, groaning in pain and wiping the blood from his mouth caused by the blow. When he doesn't hear a response, Kestner becomes even more annoyed, stating that if the boy won't fight with everything he has, he'll force him to do so, charging at him again. Kestner notices that the young man is finally about to fight seriously, and our protagonist raises his hand to strike him. However, the man easily dodges, forcing the boy to punch the ground instead. Pleased and excited by the battle, he says this is what he wanted and immediately goes on the offensive again. Preparing his punch, Mord thinks that he didn't want to show everything he was capable of just yet, but getting beaten up was boring, so he decided to hit back. A sincere exchange of blows between the two begins, with punches almost impossible to see. After trying to land a direct hit on his opponent, Kestner dodges the blow and comments that the boy made too many unnecessary movements. From slightly below, the man remarks that the young man is talented, but his combat skills are still that of a novice as he begins to gather mana in his hand. The man launches the attack at his opponent, but only manages to hit his forearm. Kestner comments that he thought the boy wasn't going to defend anymore. Mord responds, saying that he knew he would do that, and then counterattacks with mana, landing a solid hit on his opponent's vulnerable arm. However, Kestner is surprised to realize that the attack on his arm was the same one he used earlier, double attack. The man notices that his opponent had not only blocked his attack on purpose, but had also copied the movement, replicating it too quickly. Kestner becomes extremely irritated, clenching his fists as he realizes that the boy managed to replicate his double attack way too fast. A golden aura with several lightning bolts begins to emanate from the man's hand, and he says he's becoming more impressed and interested in our protagonist. And because of that, Mord would now have to give it his all. Seeing that his opponent was using impulse, the young man wonders if his enemy is finally going to use his true power. However, the Archduke immediately interrupts the fight, ordering them to separate, surprising Kestner. The elder tells his subordinate that what they had done was enough to test Mord's strength. He begins walking towards his son, remarking that it's incredible to see the young man at this level, especially since he just went through the Blood Awakening. However, cutting short the moment of pride, the Archduke comments that there's something else he wants to see and begins to prepare a burst of energy in his hand. The protagonist realizes that it's an impulse sphere and wonders why his father is suddenly using it. Immediately, the boy puts his hands forward, trying to absorb the attack to avoid his death. In his mind, the boy curses Werners while questioning if his body can withstand this force. Trying to push beyond his limits, the young man declares that he won't use his secret ability and will endure it with just his body. Memories of the battle against Fian come back, and the young man comments that he only managed to block the impulse because he was stronger than his opponent, so that wouldn't work here. However, if he used impulse as well, he could block it, and quickly the boy invokes a white aura in his hand, stopping the attack. His father smiles, and Todd is stunned, stating that it's impossible because our protagonist just went through the Blood Awakening. Seeing all the blue energy flowing from his student, the instructor questions how the boy is already able to use that ability. Looking at his own hand, Mord comments that the talents of his body are better than he imagined because he can see someone using an ability and already replicate it. The Archduke is extremely pleased, saying that this is expected of someone of his blood, and hearing this, Mord becomes irritated, remembering that this man uses people. Werners, brimming with pride, comments that he will reward his son since he passed the test, then asks what the young man desires. The nobleman says the boy could have wealth beyond imagination or a mentor to train him, and he could ask for anything. Our protagonist is momentarily confused, noting that she never expected something like this, but she already knew what to ask for. She just needs to collect the world fragments before Aiden does, as that's what's necessary to prevent the world's destruction. The boy replies that he doesn't want such trivial things, and his father then asks what his wish is. Surprising everyone, Mord says he wants to challenge the tomb of the god of combat. Taesum explains that there are places called dungeons in the novel. They are dangerous and filled with monsters. The dungeons in this world are a bit different because they have signs of erosion from other worlds. In other words, dungeons form where this world and another overlap. Almost all dungeons overlap with the demon realm, but the tomb with the god of combat is said to be where the god of combat Werners was created. This place has an overlap with another world, and it's where one of the world fragments is located. Upon hearing his son's request, the Archduke becomes extremely serious and remains silent for a few seconds. He places his hand on his chin, continuing to ponder it, and our protagonist wonders if he asked for it too soon. His father asks what the boy's reason is for wanting to go to that place, since there doesn't seem to be a clear motive. The boy gives the excuse that he heard there are traces of the god of combat Werners there, and he wants to see with his own eyes the source of the lineage he acquired upon awakening. Kestner, who was the boy's opponent earlier, says that this boy is more immature than he thought. He explains that the tomb of the god of combat is the place where the coming-of-age ceremony is held for those of the direct bloodline. And what he's asking for is basically a challenge to the direct bloodline, and a bastard child shouldn't be allowed to go to that place. Unexpectedly, Vernars agrees and Kessner questions why his master would allow it, but the Archduke says he already knows what his subordinate is thinking. He explains that there have been many instances where someone outside the bloodline went to the dungeon for the sake of an expedition, and this has happened in every generation. Vernars asks if his subordinate also wants to go. However, the man says nothing and remains silent. Vernars thinks that Kessner has lived a miserable life just for being a bastard child, and he's sure that both Mord and Kessner also want to taste the privileges. However, he tells our protagonist that it's too early for the boy to go, but he'll give him a chance when he becomes an official warrior. Clenching his fists, Mord thinks that becoming an official warrior isn't too difficult, but he needs to be faster than the protagonist of the novel Aiden and obtain the fragment from the tomb of the god of combat. With confidence and hope for a promising future, the boy confirms to his father, stating that he understands. Kessner, who had just fought against our protagonist, watches the boy leaving with his instructor, remaining silent. The blonde man asks his master if the boy's name was Mord. However, ignoring his question and surprising him, Vernars asks what he thought of the boy given that he had fought against him. The man explains that it seemed like Mord was hiding a lot because he was certain the boy hadn't given his all in the fight. Vernars, hearing this, responds that it seemed like Mord had given his all to hold back the impulse sphere and had also learned that ability the moment he received it. Kessner acknowledges that he knew there were people who could learn things quickly. However, the thing that shocked him most about the young man was the amount of mana he possessed, as even though he didn't yet know how to control it, the boy's mana level was astonishing. The Archduke comments that Mord's mana had a resemblance to that of Erna, and he was about to say something more but suddenly stops. Kessner asks what his master was going to say, but the man remains silent, then dismisses it, saying it was nothing. Vernars thinks that the boy's gaze lacked any desire and was almost lifeless. The eyes of his bastard children were always full of the desire to be recognized by their father, but his were different. Smiling, the old man remarks that the boy reminds him a lot of his mother, Reina, and that he was an extremely interesting child. Back at the third-level training center, several warriors are seen dueling with each other. Mord arrives and takes the opportunity to observe the fight happening among his teammates. The young man thinks that he nearly died of boredom over the past 4 days, but now will finally learn something useful and worthwhile. He turns his attention to a conversation where a background character mentions hearing that the Vernars are going to select 5 of the bastard children to challenge the tomb of the god of combat. A brown-haired boy says that apparently this is an expedition to discover a pattern in the tomb of the god of combat since the pattern changes every time. Hearing all this, Mord thinks that Kessner has also decided to try facing the tomb of the god of combat, and he needs to hurry to become a warrior. Daisley arrives at the scene asking if everyone is present, and a background character responds that everyone is there except Fian. Imposingly, the instructor commands all the students to prepare for training. After saying this, the man walks over to our protagonist, asking if he's the novice, and the boy promptly responds that he is. The elder remarks that Mord cannot participate in this training because it's his first day, and that he should ask his peers for help in learning what has already been taught. Vernars becomes irritated, questioning why his instructor doesn't want to teach him since he doesn't want to learn from other students. Daisley, enraged, comments that the young man is giving orders right after beating Captain Fian on his first day, and the boy retorts that he has already been punished for what he did. However, this does not calm the situation, making the instructor even more furious. He orders the boy to stop talking back, questioning if this is how he was taught to behave. Mord maintains a firm expression, saying that Daisley shouldn't misunderstand since he's only speaking the truth, and it's the instructor's duty to listen. The instructor cannot tolerate being answered back and, consumed by fury, strikes our protagonist. After Mord steps back slightly from the blow, the old man seizes the opportunity and grabs the boy by the collar, calling him a brat and asserting that he's giving him an order. The instructor orders the boy to run laps around the center until the training ends and expects him to maintain high speed while paying attention to the lessons. With this, the instructor begins to laugh with a psychopathic expression, stating that the boy will be punished if he fails to answer any questions. Mord tries to restrain himself but lets a bit of mana leak out as he clenches his fists in anger at the humiliation he's experiencing. Seeing this and realizing that once again his authority is being challenged, the elder loses control. The old man thinks that this brat dares to disrespect his authority as an instructor. This was unacceptable, and then the old man struck our protagonist again while saying that he was mocking his own instructor. Mord became extremely furious but tried to contain his anger, and at that moment, the old man began to lecture him, asserting that the instructor's authority was absolute there. And if the boy continued to resist, he would be removed as a student, immediately asking Mord if he had understood everything. Wiping the blood from his mouth after taking the old man's blow, the boy began cursing him in his mind and wondered if he should hit him. However, he changed his mind, thinking that if he caused another fight there, it could interfere with his test to become an official warrior. And for that reason, he needed to hold back so he could go to the tomb of the god of war. So the young man responded that he understood, addressing the old man as Sir. Stating that his authority was restored, Daisley questioned what the boy was doing because he should be running. And even though he was silent, Swallowing all the anger he was feeling, our protagonist began to run as his instructor had ordered. Watching the back of the student who had defied him, the instructor thought he would ensure the young man was punished for disrespecting him. Our protagonist explains that during the time that passed after that event, Daisley seemed to hold a grudge for what happened and continued to punish him for no reason. It became apparent that the boy was constantly being assaulted by the old man. The boy also stated that Daisley had gone mad with the authority he had and let it completely go to his head. If he felt that his authority was being even minimally threatened, he would punish anyone verbally and physically without feeling pain or remorse. And he always imposed punishment in the form of training for all the students. And because of that, no one could resist since it was something he could do. This was how Daisley governed that place, the third level of the Vernar warriors. After a few days, Mord could be seen doing an exercise using only one finger. However, even then, the instructor kept complaining, questioning if he was disobeying his own instructor. The young man thought he knew why his instructor was doing that, as it was just because Mord had used mana in front of the other apprentices that time. Seeing that he wouldn't get a response, Daisley left in anger, realizing that the boy wouldn't answer no matter what he asked. But the man stated that the boy should remain in that position until the end of the day, and if he moved a muscle, he would be punished again. While doing the exercise, Mord thought he held back because he believed the old man had something valuable to teach, but it seemed he was just passing on mediocre training. Inside his quarters, Daisley was sitting, thinking deeply, resting his chin on his arm. The man cursed Mord, wondering how that brat dared to talk back to him, and the punishment he gave the boy should have destroyed anyone's body. But Mord endured until the end, as if he wanted to rebel one day, practically challenging his authority. The man wondered how a bastard child with no training could be so strong, and then he punched the wall. Getting up, he then stated that the boy would fall soon and he would make sure of it with his own hands. The next day, we hear the protagonist saying that he will take the test to become an official warrior. He is staring at an instructor while the other cadets are shocked by what he has just said. The confused old man asks if he is sure about what he just said, and our hero just firmly confirms it. He is immediately reprimanded by the old man, who says he has never learned anything to become a warrior. But that doesn't intimidate Kim, who says it's because the instructor neglected his job. Then he approaches him and says that in reality, the old man is not qualified to teach. This irritates an elder, who tells him to stop talking nonsense as he is the only one who judges who can take the test or not. But while the old man continues to complain, the protagonist gives a malicious smile, saying that he can't say that, and that he officially challenges the instructor Daisley to a combat god's spirit. Upon hearing what the young man just proposed, the old man begins to be in shock, remembering that the spirit of the combat god refers to the sacred practice of duels. And since all those with great powers also follow barbaric traditions, this duel simply means that the strong one is right. They believe that the combat god gives his blessings only to true warriors, meaning that the duel's winner is always the one who is right. Soon the old man questions how the protagonist knows this, but he says it doesn't matter and that, according to the laws of Vernars, an apprentice can request the combat god's spirit from an instructor. In fact, this came from a legend where the combat god grew up without knowing his true abilities, as when he was younger, he was harassed by powerful beings. Soon after he took the throne, he told all his descendants that those who dictate over others must have the necessary ability for it. Therefore, in Vernar's laws, it is allowed for apprentices to challenge instructors for the combat god's spirit. The protagonist thinks the old man was crazy when he considered this, but now will dare to use it in his favor. However, soon Daisley grabs his collar and says he is just a child to be asking for this, and that he is too young to talk about such an important sacred right. But the protagonist quickly tells him to shut up and not to fool himself, since he does not have the right to deny the combat god's spirit. He then lets go of the instructor's hands and slowly walks away from him, while his back is being watched by the same. The protagonist then prepares to do something with his mana, and shouts for everyone to hear that apprentice Mord requires the combat god's spirit to duel against third-level instructor Daisley. He repeats this message as a shout that echoes throughout the palace so that everyone can hear what is happening. But this displeases the instructor. However, before he can say anything, the protagonist turns around, telling him not even to think about denying his request. But if he plans to do so, he will spread to everyone that he ran away from a disciple. Daisley gets irritated by the brat's presumptuous actions, but our hero remains firm and asks if he still hasn't understood what is happening, and that this is his last chance to prove himself a true instructor, warning the old man that he no longer wants to waste time with useless people like him. Feeling the pressure the young man is emanating, the instructor begins to think he should have come wearing brown pants, and that it seems he didn't show all his power when he faced Fian, thinking that now he can't hold back, and even if he is talented, he is still just a child. Daisley then says that he will regret acting like this and begins to prepare the day of the duel, but before he finishes his sentence, he is interrupted by the protagonist, who explains that the challenger is the one who chooses the time and place, and that the duel will be held in the same place in 1 hour, since he doesn't want to waste time with useless people like the instructor. And as he begins to walk away, he says he won't stop him if he wants to flee, completely scaring the instructor, who wonders where this psychopath came from. A little further from the training ground, the protagonists shout echoes, making the blonde man standing by the window curious about an apprentice requesting the combat god's spirit against an instructor. The man knew he wasn't an ordinary child, but he never imagined he could entertain him in this way. Soon he calls his servant, who promptly responds and says they will go to the third-level training center. Then we discover that the man is the one he faced a few days ago. Heading to the training center, we notice a lot of movement with two other people in the middle of the hall. The protagonist seems very calm while the people around wonder if this is the guy who requested the combat god's spirit. Then we also see instructor Daisley, fully prepared and equipped with weapons, shields, and even armor. Mort approaches, saying that he really chose to fight instead of fleeing, and is answered by the instructor, who says he will take that arrogance out of him by force. But this threat ends up being in vain, as the MC says that a barking dog doesn't bite. This makes the instructor even more irritated by the young man's insolence, while he just smiles calmly. Suddenly, someone arrives, asking if they are late and saying they thought they wouldn't make it in time. Soon both realize it's Mr. Kessner, and they question why he's there. The problem is that hearing the protagonist speak so calmly to the official makes the instructor suspicious. Realizing that the boy knows this official and confirming that he wasn't being arrogant for no reason, as he is supported by someone powerful. Kessner says he heard about what was going to happen there and then asks what he is planning by requesting the combat god's spirit. He is soon answered by Mort, who says that the man is neglecting his role and seems to only have malicious thoughts in his mind. This makes Kessner chuckle slightly as he finds the protagonist amusing. He then asks if our hero really thinks he will win and says that even though the instructor is retired, he shouldn't be underestimated. The old man also speaks up and says he will beat the protagonist until he begs for forgiveness, but that the fight shouldn't start yet since the witness he called hasn't arrived. However, Kessner quickly asks the instructor if he could be the new witness, as the other hasn't shown up yet. Upon hearing that, people in the training center start wondering why Mr. Kessner wants to be the witness for this boy. Even the instructor is confused and is asked by the blonde man if he thinks he's not qualified for the role. This startles the old man, who quickly backtracks, saying that Kessner is a busy man and so on. But hearing the man address him informally, the blonde man questions whether the instructor is disrespecting him and warns not to confuse respect with weakness. This makes the old man apologize and bow his head quickly. But of course, someone as proud as he is wouldn't be happy about being humiliated. The protagonist then apologizes for interrupting and says it's almost time, prompting Mr. Kessner to ask what he's talking about. But he soon understands the situation and wishes the boy good luck, hoping he didn't come all the way for nothing. Mord then tells the instructor that it's time to start, and the old man, still angry from being humiliated so many times, also wishes to be in the fight. He says that the protagonist managed to surpass Fian's momentum with just his body reinforcement. But while preparing an aura on his sword, he says that Mord will regret it if that's all he has. This makes our hero get a little more serious. The old man then continues, saying he wants to see if Mord can also block a sword with that momentum. But before he can do anything, the protagonist says he's funny, leaving Daisley confused. While preparing his aura, Mord says he's completely wrong, and asks if he really thinks an apprentice would challenge an instructor with just that. Then he shows his aura spreading across his entire body while looking confident in the fight. This makes the old man realize that Mord is using body impulse and wonders when he learned that. But before he can continue his line of thought, the protagonist quickly advances, gathering all his aura into his fist to throw a punch. But the confident old man says it won't change a thing, and soon the two attacks collide, causing a powerful shockwave. However, the protagonist's fist ends up winning, shocking the old man, who realizes the attack is coming his way. And soon he's hit by our hero's strength, being thrown backward, where he uses all the strength in his legs to stop, becoming extremely confused, wondering how Mord pierced through his attack and sent him flying. But once again, the protagonist advances, already preparing a new attack. This time, it's blocked by the instructor's shield. He admits that our hero is good, but that he won't be able to defeat him with those skills. Soon, Mord notices something coming his way. Then the instructor uses his impulse on the shield, sending a wave of mana that throws our MC backward. As he says that despite being strong, he still lacks experience, and that he has no deep knowledge of mana techniques. That's why he is too young to fight someone like him, who carries great experience, attacking our hero, who barely manages to dodge. But his dodge wasn't perfect, and a small part of his cheek ends up getting cut. Realizing the situation is getting worse for the protagonist, the instructor says that he has survived many battles and near-death situations, so someone as weak as him daring to challenge an elder is practically a death sentence, and that he is not a bastard child like Mord, who can be underestimated. With the last attack, the instructor throws the MC far away. He manages to stay on his feet, but is now much more cautious. He knows the old man is right about having more experience, and the blonde man watching the fight says that although the boy is talented, his combat skills are still those of a novice. If he loses here, he will have to leave, and that's exactly what Daisley wants. So he wonders what the young hero will do now. Back in the fight, the instructor asks if a cat got the protagonist's tongue, but Mord just approaches, saying that even though the instructor is a jerk, his skills aren't bad, impressing the old man with his arrogance. Even so, Mord remains cold and says that if the instructor thinks he will lose, then it's clear he's an unqualified instructor. But the old man just laughs, saying he will train him right here and now. However, the MC says that's impossible, startling the elder, who wonders where all this energy came from. Looking closely at the protagonist, he notices some changes in his physique, in addition to the aura emanating from him. When he realizes that the young man now has completely white hair, the instructor instantly knows he has lost, since his divine blood has been unlocked. Our hero just opens his eyes, determined to finish off this old man. And as he approaches, the elder is now absolutely certain that he should have come to this battle wearing brown pants. Mord says this is the first time he's fought like this, and he doesn't think he will be able to hold back, so it's better for him not to be resentful when he dies and becomes a ghost. After going through the divine blood awakening at 15 years old, those who belong to the Vernar's lineage can use the powers of divine blood. However, most of them stop using the divine blood powers to increase their mana storage, and this allows them to gain incredible powers. But if someone exists who can fully control the divine blood, that person will gain incomparable power. The people watching this scene in the training room are shocked, wondering if the protagonist is really only 15 years old. Even Kestner is impressed at how a 15-year-old boy managed to awaken the powers of divine blood. And although he was considered the most talented among several boys, it took him 4 years to awaken it. Yet this young man, who arrived just 8 days ago, has already reached this level. Instructor Gaisley is also beginning to soil his pants, because when he looks into the boy's silver eyes, he is certain that he has awakened the blood. As the protagonist throws his superior instinct aura all around, he finds it unbelievable. Mord then tries to show a little mercy, and says that if he wants to give up, he can do so and will only lose his pride. But the instructor shouts, telling him not to talk nonsense, because even if he managed to awaken the divine powers, there's no way he would lose to a novice. However, before he finishes speaking, the protagonist quickly approaches, telling him not to regret this later. But this attack is something the old man anticipated, and he is fully confident he can defend it. So he puts his shield in front of the protagonist's blow, saying it will have no effect. But the opposite happens as he is sent flying with just one hand movement from our hero, falling violently to the ground as he is dragged across the dirt. Suddenly, it hits him, and the old man realizes that this is the power of divine blood. Mord wonders if his attack was too strong, as he still can't control it properly, while the old man is certain he just lost to a 15-year-old boy. Even so, he maintains his pride, and despite his injured shoulder, he doesn't let himself be defeated. He then begins to use all of his impulse in the sword, preparing a desperate final attack, charging towards the protagonist and preparing an attack strong enough to eliminate him. But before he can even make a move with his sword, our hero is already close, telling him to drop that pride. Then incredibly, the old man manages to dodge the attack, moving behind him, while shouting for him not to lower his guard, saying that no matter how strong he thinks he is, when it comes to combat technique, he is far superior. A large explosion is seen after the elder's attack, earning praise even from Kestner, who finds it incredible that he managed to turn the situation around. However, the most powerful weapon and shield of the Vernars are their own bodies, and soon we realize that the sword imbued with impulse wasn't even enough to scratch the protagonist's body, since it won't hurt someone who has already awakened their divine powers. In that moment, Instructor Gaisley felt true terror, as he realized that the sword he had trained with for decades was doing nothing against a 15-year-old boy. He then starts swinging it frantically in all directions, finding it impossible. But our hero just stands there, receiving the attacks. He soon says that he's disappointed, because not only is he weak, but he also wanted to act like the greatest of all. Upon hearing this, Gaisley gets irritated, preparing another attack with all his strength. But with bare hands, the protagonist stops the sword's movement, and explains that those who are descendants of the god of combat fight with their own hands because there is no weapon stronger than their physique. He then asks if the instructor really thought such an attack would hurt him, while gripping the old man's sword even tighter, and then releases an electric shock using his divine power, making the old man writhe in pain from the shock of over 1,000,000 volts. The elderly man then falls to his knees before the protagonist, and looking down at him, Mord asks if he's in shock and tells him to accept his defeat, or else he swears he will eliminate him right there and then. Gaisley, who is not only in shock but also soiled his pants, is now terrified of that boy, realizing that from the beginning, he was never able to win against this incomparable power. He then lowers his head coldly and accepts his defeat before our hero. At that same moment, the crowd watching the battle begins to shout that the son of Vernars defeated Gaisley. Even the blonde man finds it impressive how a bastard son who awakened the divine blood managed to use the blood powers. Not only that, but he nearly killed his instructor in the combat god's spirit duel, so he has no idea how strong he might become. And as he watches the protagonist walking away towards a gate, he remarks that it was a good battle. In the distance, we observe 2 other people who were spying on the battle. The hooded one says that boy was incredible, and mentions having heard that he was quite brave and unafraid of being defeated. We then discover that the hooded person is a beautiful woman named Erna Vernars, 7th in the direct lineage of the Vernars.